One of the aims of the G7 summit in Japan is to craft a unified position against what is called economic coercion by China. The U.S., for example, says that Beijing retaliates with economic measures when other governments or companies, businesses, do something that it doesn't like, such as maintaining ties with Taiwan, for example. Now, we don't know if G7 members will find common ground here, but we can confirm that this agenda item does not sit well at all with Beijing.
China has never engaged in coercion or bullying. China has always opposed hegemony, unilateralism and coercive diplomacy. We urge the G7 to conform to the general trend of the era, which is openness and inclusiveness, and refrain from engaging in coercive diplomacy and closed and exclusive cliques.
All right, for more now, I want to bring in Matthew Reynolds from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Matthew testified at a hearing of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on China's economic aggression and predatory practices just yesterday. Matthew, it's good to have you with us. I read the transcript from your testimony. I'm wondering, have you received any feedback or reaction from lawmakers on Capitol Hill since yesterday?
First, I want to say thank you for having me here today to talk about this important topic. Personally, I've not received any feedback from the hearing, but I will say that the hearing, I think, is indicative of the increasing attention on Capitol Hill that this important issue is receiving, and the efforts by the administration also to counter China's economic coercion.
Your organization recently published a comprehensive report on Chinese economic coercion. What is the big threat here?
Yeah, so the big threat from China's economic coercion is basically its deterrent effect. Does the looming threat of China's economic coercion prevent allies and partners from taking positions to push back against China's malign behavior in other domains?
And would you say that China is open about the way it targets those entities which have displeased it? I mean, compared to the way the West uses sanctions?
I would say it's the opposite. So in our report you mentioned there, we did a deep dive into 8 cases of China's economic coercion that span roughly the last 13 years. In those case studies, we identified some common characteristics of China's economic coercion. In the report, we named quite a few, but informality really stood out as one of the primary characteristics of China's economic coercion. Beijing likes to mask its economic coercion behind excuses. That way, it gives itself a bit of plausible deniability.
I was reading a report just this week that listed countries in the global south that have taken huge loans from China, and that the terms of paying back those loans have led these countries to maybe behind closed doors to regret taking the money to begin with. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, is what China does, is it really effective, or does it actually hurt itself as much as it hurts others?
Yeah, that's a great insight there. I think from our report, and something that surprised us, was looking into these cases, we actually saw that China's economic coercion had mixed results at best in achieving its short-term goals, and actually carried long-term strategic costs for Beijing in a lot of these cases. So, I think Australia's case is very indicative of this trend. So Australia has not backed down in its calls for an investigation into the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic, and has only been pushed closer to the United States since China's economic bullying began, inking the AUKUS security agreement in 2021. So you do see a lot of blowback for Beijing when it uses these tactics.
If you had the ear of all of the leaders at the G7 summit in Japan right now, what would you tell them to do in terms of developing a counter strategy against this economic bullying?
So first, I would say, you have to build resilience to China's economic coercion. And one way you can do that is engaging in free trade agreements with like-minded allies and partners that will reduce China's economic influence on a relative basis, and help to speed these market adjustments that we see taking place naturally in response to China's economic coercion. At the same time, I would recommend that the G7 look to develop relief policies that they can use to then provide relief when an ally or partner is coerced by China. One thing that we identified in our report was that speed of response is very important. that countries are most likely to back down, during the threatening process or shortly after those sanctions by China are in place. So the U.S. and the G7, other G7 countries should be quick to provide relief and speed those market adjustments to decrease pressure on the targeted country.
Let me ask you, Matt, before we run out of time, what role does trade play in any U.S. pushback against China? I mean, a lot of countries see China as their most important trading partner.
Yeah, so as mentioned in our report, we sort of recommend a two-pronged strategy. On one side, we have building resilience. On the other side, we have providing relief, and trade, free trade agreements specifically, are the major component of that resilience side of our counter strategy that we put forward in this report. So as you mentioned, countries are increasingly seeing, I think a majority of countries now see China as their number one trading partner. And the way the U.S. can offset that influence is by getting back in the business of free trade and negotiating free trade agreements with allies and partners to decrease that influence on a relative basis that China has over our friends.
Matt Reynolds with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Matt, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We will probably be calling upon you again soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.